Our Across the Aisle segment tonight, it was a nail-biter, but today the Senate confirmed Betsy DeVos as Secretary of Education. It was a 50-50 vote, with Vice President Mike Pence casting the tie-breaking vote, which made it the first time in history a vice president cast the deciding vote on a cabinet appointee. The DeVos confirmation is a major loss for Democrats, who made her their #1 target among President Trump's cabinet appointees. Take a look.
On this vote, the yeas are 50, the nays are 50. The Senate being equally divided, the Vice President votes in the affirmative, and the nomination is confirmed.
President.
With me now, Democratic strategist Joel Payne. Joel, how's it going?
With you.
Thanks for being here. It's great to see you. All right, Joel, this was a piece of history. Betsy DeVos confirmed. Vice President Pence cast the tie-breaking vote. The first time in history a vice president has had to be the tiebreaker for a presidential nomination or a cabinet position. What's your reaction to this?
My reaction is you're right. I mean, it is history. I think it shows the divided nature with which President Trump has been leading. You know, he had been promising to bring the nation together. He had been promising to name appointees that would unite people. He couldn't even unite his party on this. So I think it just shows that President Trump has a lot of work to do to reach that comedy across the aisle that he's been talking about.
Right, and this is actually an interesting one. I was excited to talk to you about this today, and I'm glad you brought up the idea of uniting America, because education is one area that I truly don't understand why there's not more common consensus on appointees. I mean, I think the pivotal part of Betsy DeVos, the pivotal reason that President Trump nominated her for Secretary of Education, is because she's such an advocate for school choice. Joel, I don't understand why any Republican, any Democrat, like who opposes school choice?
Well, I think it's a matter of really wanting your Secretary of Education to be somebody who actually believes in traditionally how we educate our children. Betsy DeVos has a very accomplished career outside of education, but she really has no experience that makes her a viable candidate for this position. And I think you saw that. I mean, again, Lisa Murkowski is not considered to be a progressive or a liberal by any stretch, and she could not support Betsy DeVos. Susan Collins came across the aisle to say she couldn't support Betsy DeVos. So I don't think school choice divides people.
No, and
I think you're right.
I would actually have to disagree here.
Yeah.
I don't think it's so much about the lady herself. I don't think it's so much about Betsy DeVos or her qualifications, because Democrats have said that other appointees of President Trump's are unqualified or don't agree with them. I really do think the crux of the matter is they don't agree, with school choice or with voucher programs. And Joel, we've seen what voucher programs do, particularly to low-income or inner-city kids. I mean, this gives them the opportunity to get a really high-quality education. It helps get them off the streets. It helps get them opportunities to go to schools that they might not otherwise be. I mean, I don't understand why there wasn't some sort of coming together, some sort of reaching across the aisle here with Betsy DeVos instead of this attack, because we so desperately need that type of program.
Yeah, I think we just have a fundamental disagreement about Ms. DeVos's record. And look, she's a Secretary of Education now. She's the president's pick. But there was a lot of concern about the fact that you're asking somebody to run the federal agency that's responsible for educating our children and for administering education from a national level, who does not believe that department should exist. I mean, she's really somebody who is being sent there by President Trump to wind down the Department of Education, just like he wants to do with Rick Perry at Energy, just like he wants to do with Ben Carson at HUD. This is a strategy by this president.
Right, but when it comes to the charter school aspect, that's what I'm talking about. I understand why Democrats, 100% aren't going to support the nominees of President Trump. They just don't agree with the, the principles, the values, the policies. That's fine. But there should, back to the school choice and the voucher thing. Why wasn't there something that came together? I mean, as the Secretary of Education, she is the Secretary of Education now. I mean, are you or other Democrats going to say, hey, I don't agree with her that we should wind down the Department of Education or whatever you think that is going to happen, but don't you agree with voucher programs?
Well, whether I agree with them or not, look, I mean, they've worked in certain parts of the country, and certainly I'm sure that there are certain localities where it makes sense. But this isn't about one person and their feeling on school choice. This is about making sure that we have a Secretary of Education and an education department that actually does what it's supposed to do, that follows with what its charter is, really. And its charter does not include winding down the Department of Education. So I think that was the disagreement. I understand what you're saying about charter schools and school choice, but I don't think that was the major issue here. I think this was about a nominee who fundamentally did not believe in the aims of this department.
Right, or perhaps in the execution of it, because I can understand that difference, and using that difference as the larger picture, that makes me understand better why Democrats would disagree with her. But when you're looking at public school, our public education system, from the past 20 years, it is vastly different than it was, when our parents were children, when our grandparents were children. It's vastly, vastly different. I mean, comparing our education, the results of our education system to other westernized countries around the world, Joel, we're woefully behind. Something in a large sense needs to change.
I agreed, and I think that part of that change needs to be having a Secretary of Education that believes in making sure that we get federal funds to schools, to public schools, to offer that assistance. I don't think most Democrats have a problem with the idea of charter schools. They certainly work in certain areas. I certainly, just as an individual, I believe in them. But I think, again, is this person actually committed to public education? I don't believe that we got a good answer in the hearings or in any of her interviews or any of the questions that she answered, that she's somebody who believes in public education. And that is problematic for Democrats.
Right, but don't you think the perspective should be that she believes in, kids, that she believes in the power and the authority of parents to be able to have that choice, rather than believing first and foremost in the institution of public education? I mean, shouldn't we want a Secretary of Education that puts kids first?
We should have a Secretary of Education that puts education first, and that's inclusive of public education. You wouldn't have somebody go and be the chairman of the Joint Chiefs who didn't believe in ever using military force or didn't believe in the power of the military. You wouldn't have somebody that fills all the other cabinet positions that doesn't believe in the aims of that department. And I think that's really what the concern is here about now Secretary DeVos. I do think, however, that given the close vote, I think that this has created the type of scrutiny that is going to hold her accountable. She is not going to be able to run far to the right with her, pretty extreme agenda that's against public education.
And I guess I would disagree with that. I don't see her as against public education so much. I just don't understand, again, from a partisan standpoint, I don't understand why it's partisan to look at education and say, what works best for kids? What educates kids the best? Is it public schools? Is it private schools? Is it religious schools? Is it charter schools? Is it homeschooling? That, to me, should be the mindset of the Secretary of Education. And once that's determined, that should be what's encouraged. Whichever is most successful in educating our children, that's what should be encouraged the most, not necessarily encouraging one over the other or making sure that public schools have a priority or that public schools are shut down. It should be objectively about what works best. But Joel, I appreciate your analysis of this issue. Thanks for coming on the show.